to the San Diego Union. Start over. Hi, and welcome everyone to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. My name is Andrew Kelly Stewart, and I am so pleased to be speaking with two of the most prominent young adult authors publishing today about their recent releases, and maybe even a little about their craft in general. Marie Lu is the number one New York Times bestselling author of the Legend series, the Young Elites trilogy, as well as the Warcross series. We'll be talking more today about her exhilarating new release, Skyhunter, which transports us to a frightening, war-torn future where the fiercest fighters must work together in order to survive. Neal Shusterman is the award-winning author of Challenger Deep, and the incredibly popular Arc of Sight series, along with myriad other novels, including his most recent, Game Changer, a modern-day sci-fi romp that also packs an enormous emotional punch. Thank you so much, Marie and Neal, for joining in this conversation today.
Very welcome. Happy to be here.
Same. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
So just jumping right in with a couple of questions that, kind of relate both books together. Both of the protagonists in your respective recent publications feel so real. In Game Changer, Ash is a relatable, funny teenager who is thrust into the unknown and the completely unexpected. In Skyhunter, Talon is that right mix of strong and vulnerable, honorable, but also flawed. So my question, and it might be a broad one, what makes for a good YA protagonist? And what makes these specific protagonists so special? I will just let whoever wants to jump in first. Why not, Neal? Why don't you jump in first?
Sure. I think the most important part of writing for YA, or really writing in general, is to have characters that are relatable, characters that you care about, characters that feel real. And it really starts with having that sense of reality to the character. I mean, if you believe the character, if you care about the character, you will take the most wild journeys with them. So it really all starts with developing that character from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely what Neal said. And on the subject of characters that feel real, a lot of my characters are inspired by real young people that I see and have met over the years. And especially recently in the last few years, it's been amazing to watch, real young people in the world and the kind of change that they push for. And, they're out in the streets and they're doing things and they're active. And I find that incredibly inspiring. So I find myself thinking about them constantly and trying to build characters that they would feel compelled to read about. And I think a lot of the best YA characters and the ones that I love the most are the characters that have this deep sense of conviction, whether flawed or not, of what they feel is wrong in the world or what they want to do for themselves or what they are aiming to get, and then go and pursue that. And I think there's something very, very hopeful in that for readers of all ages, to see these young characters going out and into often very terrifying worlds that they live in, and trying to change something or trying to make it through that world for themselves. So that's what I find myself drawn to in YA characters.
And I also think that it's sort of a bit of a cycle, because when I see a lot of these kids out there standing up for what they believe, I'm seeing them emulating their favorite characters from YA. It's like when I saw those kids, talking about gun control after, right, the kids from Stoneman Douglas High School, and I was watching one of these students talking, and I'm thinking, my gosh, that's Katniss Everdeen. I mean, this is, yeah, they're seeing their heroes, and they're taking these lessons from the books that they're reading and using it for their lives. And I think it's wonderful to see that, and just sort of makes us as writers feel a sense of responsibility that we need to deliver those characters to these kids.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. That actually leads me, not to move us too quickly to the next question, but that kind of folds nicely into the next question that I had for you. In both of these books, I'm finding a common thread in that you're addressing really important social themes and issues of identity, like sexuality, race, class, ableism. Do you see these themes as integral to the YA genre? And also, why is it important for you to touch on these themes in your projects? Big question, I know.
I think it kind of goes back to what Neal was saying about reality and mirroring, creating characters that feel real. I think it's impossible to write stories that don't address some of these issues and still make it feel like a real story about real people, because this is the reality that not just young people face, but all of us face. And, especially in the last few years, it's become impossible to ignore these things that have been around forever. So I find myself putting in a lot of social issues and things that kind of keep me awake at night, that haunt me, about the world, without realizing it. And I don't know if it's like this for you, Neal, when you write. Like, I tend to start a story and I'm like, oh, this is cool, and I'm entertaining myself and I hope people like it. And then years later, I will go back and read. I'm like, oh, I was talking about that thing that was happening that year, or this thing that I had heard about, and I understand what I was, trying to say. And it's not to say that I don't go into stories intentionally putting in themes, but a lot of times it takes me by surprise, and I realize that it's just very much like every book is just a snapshot of who I happened to be in that moment that I wrote it, and what was happening around me, and what was important to me at that time, and what I felt mattered. So a lot of it goes in organically, but I feel that it's, even unconsciously, is just whatever felt important that had to be said.
Yeah, many times things are screaming to be said, and sometimes you don't know why they're screaming. Sometimes you do know why, but it's that screaming inside of you. I mean, books are, in a sense, for writers, therapy. I mean, we are dealing with all of these issues that everybody's dealing with, and we're trying to find a way of putting those feelings and putting the questions about these situations into words and putting it out there. I mean, I think with Game Changer, I did very intentionally want to address issues that we've all been facing. And I wanted to do it from the point of view of a character who was not self-aware, who started the story not really getting a lot of these issues. And in the course of the story, being thrust into them and having to see things from different perspectives and learn how he contributed to the problems that we have in the world, and vowing to make a difference and to change that.
And that Ash really does grow. He said that's one of those relatable aspects of him that I really feel like that young character that I felt like I could tap back into, reading it as an adult, and like, oh my gosh, yes, not knowing anything, but having that spirit and that eagerness to try to learn and grow. I thought that was something that was so. That's and I think that's true in both of your works as well. Talon, am I pronouncing her name right?
That's right. Yeah,
okay, I thought I was, but both of them grow, both of them learn throughout. I know that's something that's common in the traditional arc of a storyline, but I think that's particularly true with these two characters. Do you think that's a marker also of a YA book, what you want to have happen, like technically in a YA novel, with a character like that, with that age range in the character? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you have characters that grow and characters who don't, and many times the characters who don't, those are the tragic characters. Those are the people who could have been heroes had they learned, had they been able to grow beyond the things that were keeping them, from growing. So, I look at a lot of the antagonists in stories and a lot of the, quote unquote villains as failed heroes, as people who didn't grow when they needed to grow.
I love that. That's really. Yeah,
I love that that comment about villains and how they grew at the wrong times, or didn't grow in the right way, or for whatever reason didn't become the hero. And I love exploring villains too. And you make some of the best villains, Neal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I with Talon, I feel, especially in YA, it is I think the definition of YA is just this classic Bildungsroman story of change and growth. And that age of, 13-ish to 18 or 19 is just this age of such growth that I think all of us can remember that timeline kind of in like a spotlight that is unlike any other part of our lives, And I think that's what really makes YA stand out as a genre. And with Skyhunter, Talon is a character in that time frame, growing up in a very in a very difficult world. She's living in a futuristic society that's regressed, and where she's living in the only free nation left, and she and her mother have fled into this country when she was young, and she is now one of the elite warriors defending this country, but is also not accepted because she's not from that place. And so she's got a lot of aside from the world, she's got a lot of the markers of YA, where a lot of us when we were teenagers, where you don't quite fit in, and you're trying to fit in, but you want to do the right thing, but you feel frustrated that people don't get you, that they don't accept you. So a lot of those feelings went into her growth and her trying to understand, not only herself, but who around her is her found family, who is her crew, who are the people in your life that when you are changing and going through these massive changes, that you can fall back on and that you can depend on, and how important those people are to you. So that's one of the themes that is running with Talon's character in Skyhunter, and that I think a lot of that especially that I remember from my childhood, in those moments where if you don't make the right decision, or if you do choose to make the right decision, it is often because of the people around me that are propping me up, or leading one astray. It's a lot of the things that I wanted to play with.
We'll talk a little bit maybe about also, we're talking about the YA genre, but also sci-fi. There's definitely sci-fi threads running through both of your books, and one of the things I love about sci-fi is that ability to extrapolate, to be able to look at themes in a in a certain kind of lens. So, just asking, were you aware of the role that the sci-fi element plays in your books, and did you, just curious about that, open-ended question about that element in both books?
I always have seen sci-fi and fantasy as a really great arena for telling true stories. By true stories, I mean stories of human truth. Of course, fictional, but yet you can use this as an arena for telling stories that we can all relate to, and sort of separating them from the specifics of our time. We can sort of look at it maybe a little bit more objectively. It's taking a lens. It's like taking a magnifying glass to the world and just looking at things through this very, unique and many times distorted lens, but a lens that distorts things in such a way so that it pulls things out in relief so you can see a lot more. And so I really enjoy writing science fiction and fantasy that addresses real things in the real world.
Neal, can you pause for a second? We've got there was some feedback on your end. That's what Jenna is saying on through the.
Yeah. Try talking. Try talking again.
I'll talk. Saying
no,
hello.
we're still getting. It wasn't happening before. It just started on that last question. That's
very strange because I'm getting. It's all coming through my headphones. There's no sound coming through my computer.
Okay. Do you want to? Is there a way to reset your AirPods or anything like that?
Let me try. Let me turn off Bluetooth.
And Andrew, maybe just mark where you're at in your question so we can pick back up. Okay.
Okay, I'm reconnected.
Oh, that's better. Yeah, keep talking a bit just so we can double check.
Okay, so are we going to be going back to the same question, or are we going to use that answer, or?
Let's do the question again. Yeah, if you're okay. You answered it great, so hopefully you do just as well. I think people will be able to hear you a little bit better. Okay.
It was a very good answer. Yeah, so I liked that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to pop back off.
I don't remember it now. That's the question again.
Once I'm gone, you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Another question following up again on just themes and approaches in both of your books. These are both sci-fi books as well as young adult books. I love sci-fi for its ability to allow us a chance to kind of extrapolate on like a theme, and to really like look at specific narrow down element about human life, about culture, issues and themes. What do you guys think about that? How did you feel approaching your books with the sci-fi through the sci-fi lens?
Well, I always enjoy writing sci-fi because I see sci-fi and fantasy as an arena for telling stories of human truth. Of course, through fiction, but in a sense, they're true stories. I mean, they're stories about real feelings and real things that we go through as human beings, really real situations that we need to face and issues we need to address, both within ourselves and in the world around us. Sci-fi can be kind of like a microscope. This lens that helps us see in exaggerated relief what all of these issues that we want to address. So I find it a really great way of telling stories about our society and about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly what Neal said, and what you said, Andy. That's exactly why I love sci-fi and why I love fantasy as well. I love that you get to play, with reality. So it's kind of like reality, but not quite like reality, and you can twist little rules to point the arrow more specifically at whatever it is that you want to say. And I love that no matter how strange our worlds get, the world of Skyhunter is definitely not the world of today. Although there are familiar elements, there are also zombie monsters and things that don't exist today, but the emotions of the characters are the same as reality. So, Talon may be an elite striker who is trained specifically to kill monsters, but she also, argues with friends and falls in love. And those things are what tie, I think, our readers to these very strange and otherwise outlandish worlds of sci-fi. You recognize that feeling like, oh, the electricity of somebody holding my hand, or, oh my God, I can't stand this guy. I don't know why. So those types of things, I think, are the reality that truly grounded. The emotions of our characters remain the same.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I totally agree with that. And obviously, such as we said before, just such, I'm harping on this, but such great characters in these books. They just the voice just carries you through. And both first person, obviously that's part of the way the narrative shapes our entry, the reader's entry into the world and their experience of that world. And I think you'll both just masterfully handle that. I have to ask as a fellow writer, I have to ask a craft and process question. I just must. You're both very prolific authors, so congratulations on that. I marvel at your ability to not only devise such great stories, such great characters, but to crank these books out and for them to be good books that you're cranking out all at the same time. So general question, how do you maintain that momentum? What keeps you plugging away at
it? Sometimes it feels as if it's taking forever. It's funny when people say I'm prolific. I don't feel prolific. I feel like I'm staring at the page for hours to come up with a single sentence, and it's moving like a snail, and the snail starts moving backwards. And then suddenly, after grinding through this, there's a book at the end, and people say, "Wow, you got that done so quickly." No, it doesn't feel fast at all.
Oh my God, Neal, I know, right? Every time I write a book, it feels honestly like a miracle. Where I'm like, oh, yes. I was able to do it again. This is never going to happen again. And then for the next one, just like, this is it. This is where
this is the one that will kill me. Yeah, I always get that one. Every book. At every some point.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of writing one right now, and that's exactly how I feel. I'm like, this is the one. That's it. This is my last one. And then somehow a book comes out at the end. I don't know. I think you just keep plugging away. Yeah.
I think if you don't hit that moment where you feel that this is the book that's going to kill you, then you're not doing it right. Because exactly. The second you sit back and it starts to feel easy, that's when you stop being relevant.
That's true.
So can I ask, what's your drafting process like? Do you feel like, was it Stephen King who said, write a book in a season or something like that? Hammer out a draft as quickly as possible. Is that kind of, what's your process like early, in the early stages of getting a book together, writing a manuscript? When you want to start? Yeah.
I think my process is fairly chaotic. My friend Amy Kaufman calls me a headlights writer, which is where you outline as far as the headlights can shine on the road. And so I will outline maybe 3 chapters at a time and inch my way forward that way. I used to try really hard to outline, and I still do every time. I want to be an outliner so bad, but every time I do it by chapter 4, I'm like off in the weeds. So I try to just kind of inch along, and that seems to work a little bit better for me. So my first drafts are incredibly messy. To the point I don't send them to my editor because she wouldn't understand what's going on, because like characters just disappear halfway through, and like, what happened to Sam? I don't know. So it's a very, like, only I will understand what's going on. There's like brackets everywhere. I'm like, insert science here, and I just leave holes. So that's kind of my early process. Is I do try to feel my way through the draft and get as much down as I can, and I go back and I kind of call that my draft 0, and then I go back and write the actual first draft, and that's kind of become my process. Yeah. What about you, Neal?
Very similar. I also have a 0 draft, and I do outline from beginning to end, though. But I only do that to trick myself into writing. Because I outline it, and then the second I start writing, I throw away the outline because the characters from the very beginning have other ideas of what they want to do. And so, I mean, you have a choice. You can either go with what you set, or you can follow the reality of the characters. And so I always choose to follow that reality, and it always sends me in a very different path than my outline was. So many times it's sort of trying to throw things at the characters to get them to move in the direction that I want them to. But sometimes they just don't want to. So I just have to throw up my hands and say, okay, you take the lead. Tell me where the story's going. But I start on paper. I always get a brand new notebook for everything. I write with a fountain pen, because I just started doing that like a couple of years ago, because I just love the feeling of a fountain pen. So I'm moving backwards in technology. Next I'll be using a quill. But I love writing, and so I'll do it a chapter at a time. I'll write a chapter, and then I type it into the computer, which forces me to get a complete rewrite, because nobody can read my handwriting but me. So I'm the only one who can type it in, and I'm completely revising it. Then I'll read it again. Then I'll read it out loud and change it based on how it sounds. And then I'll move on to the next chapter. And so I'll build 3 drafts of every chapter till I get to the end. And then I go back to the beginning. Now that I know that I have a story from beginning to end, and I know where it's going and how it's getting there, I'll do that full pass to get my 0 draft. And then I'll start showing to people, getting comments. Still won't send it off to the publisher. And then based on the comments that I get back, I'll revise it and get that to draft 1.
That is so cool to hear about your process. Thank you so much. I think it's important for writers of any age, to understand just the work, that goes into, the immense amount of work that goes into this. And obviously it's to great effect. You guys are putting out great novels and publishing. It looks like about 1 a year or so, actually. Is that kind of a track that you both seem to be on? That actually kind of folds me into a question that I had for Marie in particular. So thankfully there is a follow-up to Skyhunter that will be here soon. Steel Striker, I believe, is the name of your next.
That's right.
Yeah, and that'll be out sometime this fall. Is
September 28th.
Awesome. Okay, so we don't have long to wait, so that's great. Can I ask, whenever you and again a little bit about process, when did you know from the beginning that there was more story to tell for Talon? Like, whenever you started writing this character, did you think to yourself, well, I guess, is this a duology or a trilogy? I wasn't sure.
It's a duology.
A duology, so that's also kind of a different model too. Why a duology? Why a duology? Why did you think, what about this character says, what, I think this is how much plot I have? Or just want to know more about your process there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm really curious, Neal, if you know ahead of time too, since you have so many series behind you as well. I don't ever truly know how many books are needed in any series that I write until I'm about halfway through the first one or almost done with the first one. So I kind of signed publishing contracts with this general vague idea that there may be a second book, and just kind of cross my fingers and hope that that's actually correct. But I didn't know until halfway through Skyhunter that it was going to be a duology. I knew that it was going to require more than one book because I knew I just couldn't fit Talon's story into one. But I wasn't sure if it was going to be 2 or 3. And I think once I get to know my character well enough, halfway through my first drafts of the first book, that is when I get a better sense for how long their arc is going to take, or what arc I want specifically for them to take. Because it's kind of like I said earlier, where I don't really know what themes I'm trying to say until I'm almost done writing the book, and then I can look back and be like, oh, I see what message I was trying to get across, and I didn't really understand why I was telling Skyhunter until I was almost done with that first book, and then I could look back and understand what was it that was so frustrating for Talon. Why does she have to exist in this world? And why am I writing about her? What is her goal? What is her ending? And a lot of these questions were from my editor too. She's like, what is her goal? So it took me a while to understand that. And once I understood that, I was like, okay, I see where I need to go in book 2. And I see that that's all I need for the end of her arc for this story.
I'm very excited to read that. You left us on quite no spoilers here, but you left us on quite the ending there. So we must know more about Talon. Neal, did you have following up on that question too? Any comments?
Yeah, it's most of the time I do know, but not all the time. With the Arc of a Scythe trilogy, I knew that it was going to be 3 books, and I pretty much knew the direction of where the story was going to go, just not how it was going to get there. But I knew it was going to be 3. But the third one is I always find that the third book in a trilogy is the longest because you have the most things to resolve. You have to bring everybody's story together. The first 2 books, everything's kind of going like that. In that third book, you got to bring it all together. So the third one's always the hardest. But with Unwind, that was a standalone book. I was never going to write a sequel. And then when I finally got this idea of a story about a kid that was made up of all the unwound parts of other kids, I decided, well, I'm going to write the sequel to it. And when I got to page 300, I realized I can't fit the whole story into one book. And so that sequel ended up becoming a whole trilogy. So it ended up being, the first book and then the trilogy that came after to make the 4 books of that series. And then a collection of short stories to make that a five book series because I wasn't ready to leave that world. But with Game, a story like Game Changer, that is a standalone, and I knew it was going to be a standalone because I think the story packs all of its punch in the 1 volume. And the next one that's coming up is also a standalone. That one is Roxy, which is I co-wrote with my son.
Oh, cool!
Let me see if I can get it all on the screen. Co-wrote it with my son Jared, who I also co-wrote Dry with, and it's also a standalone. So some books, and that's, by the way, that's coming out in November. Some books you feel it's just one story that can be told in 1 volume. Other ones have the ability to become more.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So we just have a few more minutes left. And Neal, I had a direct question for you about Game Changer too. I figured, in reading it, it does seem like, the whole book is contained right in this, the whole story. Ash's story is really lovingly rendered here. One question I had is that Game Changer is set in very much the contemporary world, maybe even more contemporary than contemporary, because I think we're kind of just maybe slightly ahead in the timeline, perhaps a little bit. I haven't read, and I don't think this is a spoiler to say that you briefly mentioned a little bit about the Trump presidency. COVID-19 is mentioned, or the pandemic is mentioned briefly. Can I ask about your decision to do that, to set it in that contemporary world? I haven't read a lot of books yet that are addressing the pandemic. Maybe it's just because we're still in the middle of it and new books are coming out. But a nebulous question, but just kind of wondering about that.
One of the challenges of it is to tell a contemporary story when we don't know what the contemporary world is yet.
Right.
Because things have changed so much over the past 2 years. In the pandemic, trying to write, I finished my first draft at the beginning of the pandemic and realized within a couple of months, the story needed to be rewritten. Mm-hmm. I mean, the teens coming out of the pandemic are going to be different than teens going into the pandemic. We're going to have a whole different view. We're now in a post George Floyd world. I mean, we have to address these issues. These things are all part of our psyche, and they can't be ignored, and they shouldn't be ignored. And so there's got to be a way to, I felt there's got to be a way to include it all in the story and try to project, what kids will be like reading the story a year from when I finish writing it, and trying to still be contemporary and not feel like it's behind the times because the world has changed and moved on. Right. So it was a challenge to try to extrapolate how we're going to talk about all of these things after the fact.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it was a powerful move to do that, because it does make it feel, especially if you're a teenager or anybody reading it right now, it does feel so present, and it feels powerfully here. And I am glad that you made those decisions, and I think it worked to the book's benefit. I thought that was really really wonderful. So I'm seeing that our time together is almost up. I could talk with both of you all day just about the craft and about your books, your wonderful books. Again, Neal Shusterman's Game Changer, fantastic new release, and Marie Lu's Skyhunter, and then your forthcoming book as well, the follow-up to this book, Steel Striker, I think, right? So we're looking forward to that very much. And thank you again so much for your insightful responses. And for joining this discussion in general.
Thank you for your wonderful questions. Thank you.
Great. For those who have tuned in to watch this discussion, you can purchase Marie and Neal's books from our indie bookseller partners referenced on the screen below. Additionally, please consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy by visiting literacysandiego.org. You can continue to join us for a full program of author panels, exciting demonstrations, and live entertainment streamed entirely online. All videos will be available on sdfestivalofbooks.com. Again, I am Andrew Kelly Stewart, and thank you so much for joining us today.